There are several thousand collisions involving trains each year, which result in over 1,000 injuries and several hundred deaths. A majority of these deaths occur when someone is struck by a train while trespassing on railroad property. Remember, railroad property is private property. Trespassing along railroad property is not only against the law, it's very dangerous. Avoid taking shortcuts. The only safe place to cross railroad tracks is at a designated crossing. Don't get caught dead on the tracks. Stay off, stay away, stay alive.
Good morning and welcome to Community Conversations. Thank you so much for joining us on this brisk autumn day. My name is Cathy Jordan and I am the chairman for the Elmhurst Senior Commission. The Elmhurst Senior Commission provides information, advice, and advocates to enhance the quality of life for older adults in Elmhurst. Today, we are going to have a wonderful presentation, Healthy Aging and Memory. Before we get to the presentation, one of the things I would like to share with you is that we need to thank Mayor Morley and our city manager, Jim Grabowski, and the city council for actually supporting the senior commission and everything that it does. We'd also like to thank Leza's this morning for our cookies. They're a new establishment in town. They've been around for over 100 years, and I encourage you to not only eat their cookies, but to go to their establishment. But I'd like to give them a round of applause. Our commission likes to try and provide information to you as older adults, so that if in case you become into a situation where it's a crisis, you are armed with good information, as opposed to making wrong decisions when you're, pressed. So it is very important that we have these educational presentations. I'd like to thank our commissioners. Cathy Lorenz is here. Downstairs is Peggy LaCicero and Chris Hansen. Our commissioners work very, very hard trying to come up with topics that are timely, and we really appreciate all of their hard work. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Susan Frick, who is a master in social work from Rush Alzheimer's Center, and she will share research about healthy aging and memory lifestyle choices. I'd like to introduce Susan Frick.
Welcome. My name, as they said, is Susan Frick. I'm a social worker at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center in Chicago. We are one of 27 federally funded Alzheimer's centers across the country. And so we receive money from the National Institute on Health and Aging to really look at what is going on with Alzheimer's disease and how can we reduce the risk of it for people now and for people in future generations. And so we'll talk about that as we go through. And a lot of what we're going to talk about this morning is coming from some of the studies that we have going on at Rush. We are probably one of the largest Alzheimer's centers in the country, and doing some pretty large-scale research. And so much of what you're hearing about healthy aging in the news nowadays comes from some of our studies, and we're going to talk about that. And so I think the fact that we're sort of filling up this room on a cold Saturday morning speaks to that a lot of us are worried about Alzheimer's disease and are worried about memory and wanting to know if there's anything we can do to reduce our risks. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. I have a pretty strong family history of Alzheimer's and think about it all the time. And so what we're going to talk about this morning, I pretty much have plastered on my refrigerator and think about, have I done these things on a regular basis? And so I want us to kind of just talk through, and let me just make sure that works. You have a copy of the handouts that we're going to go through today. I want us just to talk a little bit about, well, what is Alzheimer's disease, if that's sort of what we're starting with. And as many of you have probably known, and probably unfortunately many of us will experience someone in our lives, or a neighbor or a family member or a friend that is experiencing Alzheimer's disease. And it's a hard thing to watch. My mom just passed in April from Alzheimer's disease, and I have both my grandmothers and an uncle, and I've worked in this field for close to 30 years. So I sure have seen what this does to a person and what this does to family too. So we definitely want to figure out what is going on. But these are the classic signs that you're seeing that have been put out by the Alzheimer's Association. They're what they call the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's disease. Now, I help run a support group for people who already have Alzheimer's disease, and one comment that one woman made was, if you're starting to experience those aren't the warning signs. She said, you've already been hit by the bus if this is what you're experiencing. So the thing that I think is hard with Alzheimer's disease as you look at this list is there are things that come on very gradually and very slowly. And Alzheimer's isn't something that comes on, and we never want to hear people in our center, when they come in for a diagnosis, say, you know, the person was fine until last week, and then something happened and they were more confused. That's not Alzheimer's disease. If something comes on that suddenly, you want to be thinking something else. You want to be thinking, was it a small stroke, or what, is there an infection going on, or is it something? Alzheimer's is what we often hear is family members saying, you know, now that I know what they have, I think they've been having problems for 5 years or more. It's a very gradual progression. And so people will start to have trouble. You know, the classic sign for Alzheimer's is what we refer to as short-term memory loss. So forgetting things that just happened. People will remember 30, 40, 50 years ago really well, and be able to recite things that, you know, sometimes they remember better. I remember with my mom, she could remember sometimes details with family way better than what I remembered. But that then started to get more limited as her disease progressed. But the main thing we want to see for saying that it's probably Alzheimer's disease is to see problems with memory and then something else too. And then as the disease progresses, it usually starts to get more pronounced in all areas. This is something that comes on very slowly. So people will have trouble with performing regular tasks. You know, I know with my grandmother, one classic sign for her was she was great at making chocolate chip cookies. And as the disease progressed for her cookies started to get a little more interesting, and she would forget certain items and put in certain items that probably shouldn't have been in a cookie. And so it would start to kind of get worse as it would go along, and she had trouble with tasks. Sometimes I had one gentleman who he one time went out to mow his lawn, which was a very familiar task for him. He loved to mow his lawn, and he mowed his lawn and then all the neighbors' lawns right down the street, along with all of the annual flowers that everyone had planted, and which is not good. And so I remember the one thing he said to me was, now I have to sit in my house and watch the neighbor boy mow my lawn, because he wasn't allowed to anymore. And of course he wasn't allowed to, he couldn't keep doing that, but it was a heartbreak for him to not be able to do these things that had been very common for him. People will start to have trouble with language too. They will start to have trouble thinking of the words that they want to say, and sometimes the entire thought that they want to say might go. Now, I don't know, as you look through this list, and this is the one that always trips me up, I look through this list sometimes and think, I've done quite a few of these already this morning. Has anyone else have that feeling? And language is one for me. We all have trouble with memory. We all have trouble where we will forget words, we will forget thoughts, or we will have lapse in short-term memory, we'll forget to do something. That's normal. That is totally normal. For people with Alzheimer's disease, this begins to progress to a point where they can't really function without having problems all the time. And so it can progress quite a bit. People with Alzheimer's will also have change in mood and change in personality. And sometimes what family members notice the most in this is, at the beginning at least, is they'll say, you know, the person just doesn't engage with the family as much as they used to. They used to love, you know, family dinners, or they used to love to go out bowling with the family, and now they'll just kind of stay home and they don't get involved. Or if you have a family gathering, they might go into a different room and kind of hang out in a different space. And that's because it can be overwhelming to try to socialize and try to interact and to try to be present to that many people. And so some people with Alzheimer's will kind of pull themselves away and they won't be as socially engaged as they had been before. And families will start to notice that. And so those are the classic signs that you see. It can play out differently for different people, that some people will progress and maintain, progress in some areas, some people will maintain skills in some areas. So it varies in how people progress through this, but these are the common things that you start to notice with Alzheimer's disease. And just so we kind of have a thought of where we are with this illness, most people with Alzheimer's disease are around the age of 85 or so, which is starting to push close to 50% at that age. Still 50% that don't. I know both when my grandmothers had this, back in the 80s, it was kind of seen as well, like, well, they're in their 80s. What do you expect? Everybody gets confused. And that's really not the case. There's a lot of people in their 80s, 90s, over 100 we have now, where people have incredible memory and aren't having troubles with this. So it's not that it's a normal part of aging, it's that something is going on. Around age 75, it's about almost 20% of the population has Alzheimer's disease, and around 65 years of age, it's close to 5%. Now there are people, and we actually, Rush runs a very large support program for people with what's called young onset Alzheimer's disease. And that's people who are under the age of 65 when diagnosed. And we actually run the program here in Elmhurst at St. Peter's Church. And we have almost 100 people that come to meetings between the person with Alzheimer's disease and the family members too. And we've had people into their 30s with Alzheimer's disease. It's very rare, but it does happen. And so the majority of people in our group right now are in their 50s, which is still a young age to have Alzheimer's, but that's a small amount in comparison. And so here's the number that I think is pretty startling. Right now they say that there's around 5.5 million. It's hard to pinpoint exactly because not everybody gets diagnosed and we don't know. But if you see that jump, we're expecting that by the year 2050, the number is going to go up to around 14 million people with Alzheimer's disease, which is huge. It's going to be an incredible strain to our healthcare system to have this many people with Alzheimer's disease. It's not that the incident is going up, it's just that the number of people in that age group is going up dramatically, and it's the baby boomers. As the baby boomers age, we're having more and more people with Alzheimer's disease. So I'm at the tail end of the baby boomers, so I'm going to be watching this progress and change. And so we're going to need a lot of people who understand Alzheimer's and understand how to care for someone with Alzheimer's disease, because this number is just going to skyrocket. So let's talk a little bit about what we see in our research. Let me just grab a Kleenex a minute. We have some of the largest community-based research studies in the country are here in Chicago and are done through the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. We have one that has been going now, we're on 21 years, and it's called the Religious Order Study. And there's several of them like it in the country, but ours is probably the longest standing now. We have over 1,000 nuns, priests, and brothers who have been part of this study and will agree to yearly testing. And we go and ask them, by yearly testing, we mean we ask questions about memory, we ask questions about lifestyle too, which is what we're going to talk about in just a little bit. And then people agree, and everyone in the study agrees, to donate their brain, spinal cord, and a little bit of muscle tissue when they pass away, which is an amazing gift. So this study has been going over 20 years. Then we realized, right about the time, a little before I started at Rush, I've been there 18 and a half years now, and they realized that that study was great and was a very amazing study, but that there was a serious glitch or flaw to that study in that nuns, priests, and brothers tend to have similar lifestyle and have lived together in a communal setting for a long period of time. And so it wasn't really representative of people in the whole, just the general population. So we started the Memory and Aging Project study. And this has over 2,000 seniors in it throughout the Chicago area. And they have agreed to the same thing. They have agreed to yearly testing. And we come out and ask them all these questions. They wear a monitor that's sort of like this, where we monitor their physical activity for 10 days. We ask about diet. We ask about how social they are. We ask questions about judgment. They go through a test a smell test too, to look at what they're able to smell. And then we collect, and memory tests, and blood tests. We collect all this information on them. And they too agree that when they pass away, they will donate their brain and spinal cord and some muscle tissue. And so we've learned from this study, that there seems to be some people, and a good number, who never show the signs of Alzheimer's disease while they're living. They test really well. They do really well on memory tests. And we would say, from looking at them, we would say that they are not experiencing any memory problems. And then we were able to go in and see the brain tissue after they passed away. And quite a few of them had what we would call the pathology of Alzheimer's disease in their brain. They had the plaques and tangles that are the hallmark sign of Alzheimer's disease that you can only see upon looking in the brain after someone has passed away. And so that really raised the question of why. Why do some people have the pathology of Alzheimer's in their brain, but they never show the symptoms of it while they're living? And that's really what brought us to there seems to be lifestyle choices that people can engage in while they're living that seem to reduce their risk of Alzheimer's disease. And this was huge news. We did not know this. When I started working in the field, we didn't know this at all. We didn't have any sense that maybe there's things we could do while we're living to reduce our risk. It was sort of like, well, you're either going to get it or you're not, was sort of the mentality when I started. And so we're finding, and it's because we have asked people in our study all these questions as they participate in our study over the years. And so we're collecting a lot of information on them about how they're living their lives and how they live their lives getting up to being seniors. And so that's how we're able to look back then after we look at the brain and say, wait a minute, these people did have the pathology of Alzheimer's in their brain, but they never showed it. We can look back and say, they seem to engage in certain activities that in a higher degree than what other people seem to, this is the part that I have plastered on my refrigerator, are these 5 lifestyle choices, because I think about these all the time, and whether I've engaged in these. So that's what I want us to spend the rest of our time together, is looking through those lifestyle choices and thinking about them. And so, the first one, physical activity. We're finding that people who engage in physical activity on a regular basis seem to do better with their memory than people who don't. Now, when we're talking about seniors, it's not that you have to work up a huge sweat, get on an elliptical or get on a treadmill and really crank it out for 30 minutes. We're talking about adding steps. You can do that, that's sure great. But we're also talking about adding steps to your daily life. And so for a lot of us, and I think it's particular in the States more than in Europe, we don't walk as much as other countries do. Would you guys agree with that? And I'm guilty of this. How many times do you go, to the grocery store or to the mall and you fight for that really good parking spot because you want to be close to the building so you don't have to walk as far? We really kind of push, and not just us, but anyone thinking about a healthy lifestyle, you want to think about, well, how can I add in those extra steps during a day? So that's why I actually wear one of these things, a Fitbit, but I'm not, there's plenty of other products, but thinking about there's days where I think, oh, I've been so physical today. I've been out and I've done so many steps, and then I'll look down at that and it's like 3,000 steps, and I'm thinking, oh, I've hardly walked. What we want to do is try to get yourself up to, is around 10,000 a day is what they push for, about 30 minutes. You don't have to do it all at one time. It can be that it's spread out over the course of a day, but we're finding that people who are more physical seem to do better with their memory as they get older than people who aren't. I'm also seeing in the group that I run with, every month I'm with about 20 people who have been already diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease with young onset, and they say they feel like they think clearer when they work out as opposed to when they don't. So there might even be something for someone who's already been diagnosed in adding that in. And so you want to think about, and I know we're heading into the winter months, which makes it harder to get steps in. If you're in any type of apartment or senior living building, there's a plus, many pluses, but you have hallways that you can walk in that can add steps. Thinking about going to the grocery store and walking around there, or thinking of going to an inside mall and walking there, thinking of doing anything that you enjoy physically. We have found that Tai Chi is awesome for working on balance issues. That is a really good exercise. If you like to go into the pool or onto workout equipment too, that is all great. We have found that even just moving around your home space and cleaning adds physical activity. So the more you can think to add these steps in, the better. We're going to kind of talk through these as these lifestyle choices come up. What we're also learning in research is there seems to be a huge link between Alzheimer's disease and heart issues. And so the more you can keep the risk of heart disease down, it also seems to lower your risk of Alzheimer's disease too, which we did not know that earlier on. And so we're finding that people who are at greater risk of heart issues, of cholesterol, diabetes, seem to be at greater risk of memory problems too. Now, as I'm going through this, if you're sitting here going, great, that's me, it's just increasing your risk. It's not a definite link. But we are seeing, it used to be that we said there wasn't a higher risk of Alzheimer's among different racial groups. That's not actually what we're seeing anymore. We're seeing that there seems to be higher risk of Alzheimer's among Latino and African Americans because of their higher risk of heart disease and diabetes also. So we're starting, and we have a huge research effort reaching out into the African American communities and into the Latino community, just starting with that group, to try to get a sense of what's going on for those groups, because we are starting to notice. The other group that seems to be more at risk is women, which they don't exactly know. One reason is men don't live as long as women, so that sure can be a reason, but they're also thinking there's something else there too, whether it's the hormone change during menopause or, they don't know. So they're still researching that, but there does seem to be greater risk for women too. But physical activity seems to have great benefit. And we're going to kind of talk in some of the other categories too about that link between heart and Alzheimer's disease. So the next one is the one that I think probably makes the most sense out of all the 5, is cognitive activities. And that is staying, keeping yourself engaged and interested and involved in the world. And the fact that you did get yourself out here on a Saturday morning shows that you're already doing a couple of these, but one being cognitive activity. Staying involved in book clubs, playing an instrument, going to lectures. Those are all things that stimulate the mind. I've even heard, we tend to think of TV as a passive sport, so to speak. But if you watch something and then discuss it with someone else, that can make it into a cognitive activity too. Playing puzzles, doing jigsaw puzzles, doing Sudoku. I have heard that for all of us, we have certain things that we like the most. Like, I'm terrible at jigsaw puzzles. At crossword puzzles. I like jigsaw. I'm better at Sudoku. I try to every once in a while do a crossword puzzle because they say that just trying something different can stimulate the brain in a different way. I've even heard the neurologist at Rush say, and I think this one sounds very odd, but I do every once in a while try it, is we all have a dominant hand. To try brushing your teeth, combing your hair, buttoning a shirt with your other hand. and see how it goes. Writing your name with your other hand. It's not pretty, I'm sure, but it does make it makes your brain work in a different way. And so it's saying, we're finding what, the term that I've often heard at Rush is they'll use the phrase cognitive reserve, that people who have built up kind of this reserve and have kept their brain stimulated can weather the storm a little bit better if Alzheimer's starts to hit. And so the more you keep yourself active, they're actually finding it has a benefit to Alzheimer's disease. So, think about it when you kind of plan out your day. Are there things you're working in that have cognitive activity too? And so the next one, let's put it up, social. So in the fact that you've come out here on a Saturday morning, you are doing something that's social. This one I find interesting. We sure didn't, I didn't think about this one when I first started working in this field, that people who stay connected to other people as they age seem to do better with their memory as they get older than people who don't. Which that's interesting, isn't it? For one thing, I think it takes a lot of cognitive ability to stay social. It's not easy to interact. For some people, I hear people with Alzheimer's say that sometimes for them, being in a crowd can be so overwhelming. Trying to stay connected and engaged and understand conversation can be overwhelming. That takes cognitive ability. And so doing that is really working your brain. We're finding that people who stay in clubs, in groups, are people who do better, people who get out. We find that people who get out of their home space more frequently do better with their memory than people who don't, and tend to kind of, stay within their whatever their space is. Now, I think this is hard as you get older and friendships change, and maybe you have to move. I watched it with my parents. They lived in this community, and then they moved to a senior care community. And I could see it with my mom, of her kind of not getting out of her home space as much. Now, it's hard to know what came first. Was she having the memory problems first, and she couldn't remember names? But that does seem to be linked. We're also seeing a link between depression and Alzheimer's disease. And sometimes families will say, I thought they were dealing with depression before I realized it was memory, because they'll just be kind of more, like we talked about a bit ago, more lethargic, not as engaged, will seem kind of down. People might stop going to church or to synagogue or to wherever they practiced. They might just not engage in the same way that they used to. And that can be the beginnings of Alzheimer's disease, or into it too, that they're just not able to keep it together. And so we are finding that we ask people in our study, how involved are you? Again, how many people would you count as your friends? And we're finding that the people who have higher number of this, of friends and people they're engaged with, are the people who do better with their memory. Now, I do think as the whole computer social networks crop up, and we think of friends as being somebody on Facebook, that's totally different. We're not meaning just someone you've connected with in a superficial way. We're meaning people you feel like, I could turn to this person if I needed help, or I could call them up and talk to them, and I do on a regular basis. That's what we're meaning as your social networks. And so I think that, again, to think about as, for all of us, as we get older, that how socially connected are we staying, and how involved are we with our different groups? And sometimes it might feel easier to skip things, but to think about, okay, no, this is really actually good. And if we think about depression, it's also good for mood to stay as engaged as possible with other people. And so staying in clubs, staying in groups of interest, being involved in a faith community, all helps to provide that social activity. And if you are someone who's moving into a new place or new program, to think about, all right, how do I get involved in this new setting? And what do I do? And how do I reach out and make new friends if friends have started to change? And we're seeing, and those of us who have spent time working in, because before I worked at Rush, I worked in senior buildings, I often would see people move into places like that and not venture out as much as they probably could or should have. And I think it's that whole adjustment period. And so if that's, watching for that, if that's you or someone you are, around, a family member too, trying to encourage them to be out as much as possible. Now, this next one. This is the one for me that causes the most internal groan, is nutrition. I think a bit of this list looks a bit like a New Year's resolution. Does anyone think that? And so I think a lot of, at least for me, I don't know how you all do with New Year's resolutions. They don't last very long for me. I think for all of us, we have ones that we can do more easily than others. I think nutrition, for me at least, is the one I have to think about a lot. We are finding, though, and this made a lot of news just recently, that there does seem to be a huge link between nutrition and Alzheimer's disease. And it's linking back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the lifestyle choices, of the issues of heart disease and high cholesterol and diabetes, that we're finding all those things that seem to be good for your heart seem to be good for the brain too. So a lot of us grew up during the rise of the American Heart Association, where we started thinking about how do we cook our food, and what, do you slather it with butter or do you do it with something else? And, and I think back to all the things I grew up on, all the casseroles I grew up on in the 60s, and we don't eat those as much anymore, and there's probably a reason. And so we're finding that there seems to be a link between all those good heart healthy foods. And so there's a few that seem to be very good for the mind. And one being, and we'll talk about it again in just a second, the omega-3 fatty acids. We're finding that one good fish meal a week seems to have really good benefit for the brain. We're finding that the antioxidants seem to have very good benefit for the brain. And also, certain vitamins. Vitamin E seems to be good. We're looking at vitamin D, and we're finding that that unfortunately, which I wish this was the case, it's not that you can get these vitamins and your nutrients in a pill. It's not that you can take a vitamin every day and then say, okay, good, I got it. I can go eat whatever it is that you like to eat then. We're finding that it's people who can get it in the food source seem to do better with their memory than people who don't. When I first started at the clinic a long time ago, anyone who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, we would put them on a mega dose of vitamin E because there was thought that that was better. But then there was risk to that too. There was risk of bleeding. And so they started taking people off that because it became just too much. And that's when we're finding, no, it's just better to get it within the food source. We're also finding that people, when you think about what you eat, to think about, am I getting enough color in what I eat? And I know that First Lady Michelle Obama has talked about this a lot. Instead of thinking about the food pyramid, to think about your plate and to think about, am I getting different colors on that plate? Because if you're getting different colors in your diet, then you're getting different vitamins and nutrients because they come in the different colors of the food. And so, to either think about the one meal you eat or to think about it during the course of a day or a week, to think about, have I worked in food of different color? Because that way then you probably are getting most of the nutrients that you need. And we just came out, and if you look it up, if you're someone to look up things online, if you Google the MIND diet, it has actually just come out from our research studies. And it's a diet that we're finding from, we have a nutritionist who will look through our research studies, Dr. Martha Claire Morris, and she has figured out that kind of a variation of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, which is good for your heart, seems to be very good for the mind. And here's the statistic, and I think it's up there now, yes, that I find very positive and very interesting, is they're finding that people who closely follow this diet reduce their risk of memory loss by 53%, which is pretty high. Here's the one I like. People who follow it just moderately reduce risk by 35%. So that, I think, is pretty exciting news, considering I'm not one who can always stick to an exact diet. And so this has been making it into the press quite a bit, and I tried to fit it all on there for you. I know it's a little small to read, and you might have to get out a magnifying glass to be able to pull it out. But they're finding that people who eat, vegetables, good leafy, dark vegetables a day. The other thing that they're finding is really beneficial is the berries, which have the antioxidants in it. We're finding that then at the bottom it lists what you should probably not eat, which is probably, for some of us, the things we gravitate towards: sugary foods, fast foods, fried. If you're limiting those, it seems to be better for the brain too. But this, I think, is very interesting, and I listed then what is seen as some good food choices on the right-hand side. Now again, I know as you look at this, you think, this is hard to stick to. But keep that in mind, that people just who moderately follow this diet do really, reduce their risk by 35%. That's quite a bit. And this is all coming from those research studies that I mentioned at the beginning. We asked them, they fill out pretty lengthy surveys on what they eat on a regular basis. And so we're finding the people who maybe they have the signs of Alzheimer's in their brain, but they've never showed it while they were living. They're the ones who seem to be doing more closely to this diet than others. And so if you look up Mind Diet, it's just been published at the beginning of this year, and was on WYCC, did a little segment on it Thursday night. It's been on TV quite a bit, and so you probably can pull up some sections on it too. The final, we have to take questions afterwards. The final lifestyle choice that I think is very interesting and has been one that's kind of come out at the tail end of some of our research is purpose. We're finding that people who maintain a purpose in life do way better with their mind as they get older than people who don't. Now again, I think this links to a lot of the other lifestyle choices we talked about: staying social, reducing depression, staying engaged. Now, what I think is interesting with purpose is it can be different for every single person. Whatever is your purpose in life and what engages you and gives you sort of drive and interest can be different. And so it could be being involved with family. It could be being involved at a church. It could be being involved in a club. It could be taking care of a pet or finishing the book you've been reading for a while. It could be anything. Whatever it is, but I think as you get older, sometimes it's hard to maintain purpose. And as work stops, it's not always easy. And so we're finding that the people who stay engaged do much, much better with their mind than people who don't. So those are the 5 lifestyle choices. I would love to say, do all these, and you're good to go. You're not going to have Alzheimer's disease. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There are some centers that are cropping up, and there are computer programs that are out there really claiming, do these things, and you won't have Alzheimer's disease. I think you always have to be careful with those. It's not, unfortunately, we're not there with research yet to know that there's a definite link between them. And so I've seen people spend amazing amounts of money on computer programs, or there's even clinics that are cropping up saying that they work to prevent Alzheimer's disease. I think you have to be careful. I think what they're doing is a lot of what we just talked about, but you just have to be careful because it's not a guarantee, unfortunately. It seems it's what we're seeing as a link, but we have a long ways to go within research to know. And so to kind of wrap it up, I just wanted to give you my contact information. At the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, we're always looking to partner with people. We have an amazing amount of studies going on constantly that are for people who are, we have these large studies that I just talked to you about, the 3,000 people between the religious order study and our memory and aging project study. Those are all people who are healthy seniors when they sign up to be in the study. They're not people who start off with Alzheimer's disease. Now, of course, if you have 3,000 seniors, you're going to have some that will then have Alzheimer's as they progress, but they're healthy as they sign up. We have quite a few other studies for healthy seniors too, looking at how people age. We have a very large study right now looking at aspirin and looking to see if maybe aspirin has an impact on Alzheimer's disease. So we have that. We also have studies for people who have already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, for people who have just mild memory problems, and we have studies for caregivers too. So we're always looking for people to be part of, say that they're interested in joining us on research, and then we see what they qualify for. So my phone number is on the slide. If anybody is interested in calling, they're more than welcome to, because I think if we think back to how many people we think are going to have Alzheimer's disease by the year 2050, we need to figure out what's going on with this. And we've made strides, we sure have, within research, and more money is being funneled into research, but we still have a ways to go to figure out what's going on with this. And it's, for those of us who have walked the journey with someone who has Alzheimer's, it's not an easy process, and definitely not easy for them. And so we want to try to figure out what's going on. I think these lifestyle choices they're a huge start, and we didn't have this 10, 15 years ago. So to be able to see this link is already a big step, but we have a long ways more to go. So I thank you all for coming out. I think, we all have a strong interest in this field, and we need to figure out what's going on in regards to Alzheimer's disease. So thank you.
We'd like to thank Susan for sharing all of that information. It is so pertinent to keep ourselves abreast of what's going on, especially, many of us, I know my mother and father had Alzheimer's disease, and I never know, and that's one of the questions I will be asking, if it's genetic. But, it's like a mystery, and it strikes different families in different ways. One of the things that I'd like to share with you is we have a representative from Metropolitan Family Services, Helen Fitzgerald. She actually is housed here at City Hall. So if you have any kind of a situation, or you have some questions that you feel that you would like to ask about senior situations, you can come to City Hall, make an appointment with Helen, and Angela Benston is also a representative, and it's one of the things that our City Council actually supports. So it's a service to you, so I want to make sure you know that they're here, and they're here for you. Did you give a little wave? Yeah, okay, great. Our next presentation will be November 7th. It is What is SHIP? It's Senior Health Insurance Plan. And what will happen is we will have a representative here sharing about Medicare and the differences between Medicare and Advantage plans and things of that nature. So, it's very informative. Medicare, if you are just entering into that arena, can be very confusing. And if you make the wrong steps, it's very hard to get out of some of those choices that you make. So make sure that you really arm yourself with that information. Typically, when I close, I have a little quote I'd like to share with everyone. Life is like a piece of art. Make sure you throw as much paint on it as you can. Thank you so much for coming out this morning and joining us for Community Conversations, and I hope you join us again on November 7th. Thank you.
The Elmhurst Historical Museum, located in downtown Elmhurst, is proud to present award-winning exhibits for visitors of all ages. Our Adult Tea Time Talk series, family programs, and special events make learning about history interesting and fun. Admission is free, and on-site parking is available. Visit the Elmhurst Historical Museum soon. Call us today or go to our website for the latest program details.